Hi, this is Kyle Higgins, and you're listening to the Geekcast Radio Network.
Let me take you on a little trip, my supersonic ship's at your disposal if you feel so inclined. Well, alright.
Hello, and welcome to the Comic Concierge Podcast, the podcast that believes comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. This is another one of my concierge episodes where I bring someone on and recommend a comic to them based upon their interests in other fields. Today, I'm very happy to have one of my fellow Cinema Geeks, Matthew Fridley. How's it going, man?
Hey, Dan. We've, never just had just the two of us on a record. It's interesting.
No. Now I know what song to play for the intro for this episode. So.
There we go.
Yeah, it's first time. And what we're going to be talking about, actually, in possibly two episodes, we'll see how it goes, the Dan Slott and Mike Allred Silver Surfer with Volume 1, A New Dawn. But before we get to that, I know with your background, you have some comics background. We've talked about it on Cinema Geeks previously. But going into this, what's your experience with comics? What has gotten you into them, gotten you out of them?
Oh, man. So, I think what got me into comic books was a childhood of the greatest superhero cartoons that we've probably ever had. I was born in the mid to late 80s, so, I had the Spider-Man, the Batman animated series, Justice League Unlimited by high school, and, there was just a run of it. Constantly, every year, there was something great, and when I was in a Walden Books, which might be a local store. I don't know. I think it's a chain.
No, yeah, I've been to one before. It's been a while. I don't know if it exists anymore. But...
I think they got bought up by Borders, and I think Borders went out of business.
Yeah.
So there we go. I was, in the D&D section right next door. It was the trade paperbacks comic book section, and I spied a Teen Titans graphic novel by Jeff Johns, and it was like $7. And I read that, and it was great. It was something I didn't know that I ever really wanted. My parents had bought me comic books when I was younger, but I'd never really got hooked. But I'd watched the Teen Titans cartoon, and now I have this comic book, and there's even more there than there was on the TV. And just as those came out, I started picking up, each trade, and by about the fourth or fifth one, I had some friends that were somewhat interested in comics, and then we found a local comic shop that we actually started going, and I ended up picking up the floppies of that same series, and ended up tracing them all the way back. I ended up getting down to the first issue, which
nice.
By that point I was going to Comic Cons, and I got the first issue signed by Jeff Johns, and I actually have a picture of when I met Jeff Johns at a Wizard World Chicago, which was a pretty big moment for me.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
But really, what got me into comic books, I guess, is community and conversation, and that's also what got me out of comic books.
Yeah.
From 2006 to 2009, I want to say I was spending $20 to $40 a week on comic books, and I have some of my best memories are from that time, like picking up 52 and going out to lunch with a buddy and reading it right there in the fast food place and discussing it. It's some of my favorite memories. But by 2009, all my friends had stopped not having money or not having time, and without that community to discuss, I just fell out. I can't sit there and read a comic book and then think about it by myself and just be done. It just doesn't do it for me. Yeah. So that's what got me out.
Interesting. I was somewhat similar too, where when I was in college is when I was in full tilt with comics, and then I moved away from most of my friends, and I didn't have the same community down here, so I was collecting them, but like you said, it wasn't the same. And there's message boards and things of that nature, but it doesn't have the same. Before I started this podcast to force people to talk to me about podcasts, I guess, or about comics.
I mean, you can force me whenever you want, Dan. I love the things.
Yeah, that's so. As of right now, you're not. Do you pick up a trade here and there, or you're pretty much out of it full force?
Well, I still buy every Star Wars one because I have to keep up with Star Wars continuity. I have to have all of the canon stuff. I'm very particular about that. Beyond that, if something really grabs me, when the New 52 happened, I actually went to the comic shop and picked up just floppies for a couple of months, And then beyond that, I bought like the trades of the Aquaman and Supergirl. But like, I just like the thing that I knew about had gone away at this point. Like because like we're throwing everything out except for Batman. So like it was even more daunting to try to get into that alone.
And well, now it's all back, kind of. So it's it's with Rebirth and all that, which has been kind of helmed by Jeff Johns. Like he hasn't written a lot of comics, but he's been like the person that was like overseeing it all for the most part. That kind of brings us to Silver Surfer, and I recommended a number of comics to you. A lot of them were fantasy based because I know you're a huge fantasy fan. But really, the reason I did Silver Surfer was mostly because I know you're a huge Doctor Who fan, and the Dan Slott has made it no qualms about the fact that this very much is taken from the framework of a Doctor Who type of universe. I mean, even someone like myself that's only watched a little bit of Doctor Who can see just the similar feelings and similar characters and things of that nature. So I was curious, based upon that, how much you enjoyed this first volume of Silver Surfer.
Oh man. It's so Doctor Who, like even in ways that may not be intentional, like because like the older iterations, like from the 60s and 70s, he was a way more violent character, not against killing and stuff. And then by the early 2000s, they'd switched the character over to this more pacifist character, who's just an explorer rather than like I'm gonna right every wrong for no matter what I have to do. And so like the Silver Surfer's whole herald past is very similar in that way. This first volume, I enjoyed it. It was great, but I feel like it took a bit to get off the runway, so to speak. It was kind of a slow build. It was good throughout, and then by the time it got to that last one, which was like a backup strip from a like an all new Marvel thing. Like that last story was just like perfect. It was like we were where we needed to be. We had all the setup that we needed, and it would just worked for me really well. I loved that last story.
Yeah, it is very. I mean, for the first bit of it, it's really, I think, kind of establishing the relationship between Silver Surfer and Dawn. And I will say this because I've read through this entire series, and if we continue going through this, there's like 5 volumes, I think, at this point. What Dan Slott has done is really he puts a lot of breadcrumbs into his final story, which is kind of amazing, which we can eventually get to how it all kind of correlates to one another. It's one of the best stories to reread, which is doesn't really mean anything to you, but I can kind of understand the slow build because it very much is like getting you acclimated to this different type of style. I love Mike Allred's art. I know a lot of people don't because it's very there's a certain aesthetic that is maybe not super appealing. It's not a type of aesthetic you typically see with superhero comics all that much, though he's written a lot or drawn a lot of Marvel books. But I could see where the slow build to that once it kind of gets the ground running and they're off exploring the galaxy, it kind of hits a new gear.
It's an interesting comment that you don't feel like he does a lot of he's not suited for superhero maybe, but like. It feels like he's drawing so much on Jack Kirby, like not only like the art style itself is kind of like a modern Kirby, but like the poses are straight out of Jack Kirby's old work.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I shouldn't say that. He did Ecstatic in the 2000s. He did the Kevin Smith retrospective, and he was actually in that for a period of time. He did like the credits for Mallrats. You can see the Man comic. It is a very retro feel to it, which I know some people don't have or don't have the huge appeal for. I personally love it, but there's almost like a weird lack of depth at times, just the way the characters work. But I feel like it works really well, and just like the timeless quality of his art is pretty phenomenal. In his character designs, and especially Dawn, like he has a certain way he draws. Like they're called like Allred girls, I think, or something of that nature. And like just the facial features, the lips, they're very like timeless retro feel to them.
Yeah, it's made all the more apparent because like she's got a lot of detail and Silver Surfer can't have a lot of detail, which makes him look otherworldly. It's a great like the art like really serves the book. Like I've got no complaints about the art.
Yeah. You mentioned, we talked about the Doctor Who piece of it. Does it like do any of the like the plots or the characters outside of Silver Surfer and Dawn feel from that world. Like, you know, as a newbie to that, I really don't know, but I was curious if you're like, oh wow, I can correlate that character with this Doctor Who character, or, you know, this very much feels like this plot from that Doctor Who story.
Like, I actually don't think I can point out any that direct correlation, which almost makes it better to me, where it's like, oh, this is very inspired by, but it's definitely not just stealing. It's like, he didn't just put the Master in here. Like, there's no Daleks in here. Maybe the guys who are kidnapping champions from around the world, like, that might be out of some 80s story that I haven't seen yet, but like, it doesn't feel like it's really thieving in any way, just inspired in the best ways to become the best kind of story.
Yeah, I that's good. I was always, because it's always that thing where it's like the best form of flattery is, what is it? I can't think of the saying right now.
Imitation.
But I don't, like you said, I don't think it's certainly imitating it or, you know, influenced by it. But I think really where it seems to correlate with that a lot is the way it kind of, the plots and the conflicts resolve itself. You know, usually with a superhero story, it's like whoever has the most power or, you know, hits the hardest. But there's more of an like intellectual solving of a puzzle or something of that nature, or like some sort of like human quality that tends to actually be the way that they solve whatever, you know, conflict that they're trying to come to, whether it's like, you know, getting the heart where, or it's set up where you think the one person is the bad guy, or, you know, the person that they need to save, but in fact that, you know, that that world that they go to, and you find out like why it was created, because they kind of stole the heart from that one character. I just think it's interesting, like how they solved all those different quandaries, but did it in a more intellectual way.
Yeah, because I feel like Silver Surfer's got to be a hard character to write to be interesting, because toe-to-toe he can beat almost anyone. But beyond Galactus and the other Heralds, there's very few people who can stand up to him and be an interesting fight, just because the Power Cosmic can do almost anything. That's like its thing. Like, you even posted a page on Twitter, just like, yeah, it was written in a time where, I don't know, I feel like forethought wasn't the best thing in comic books. Back when the first 5 times a Fantastic Four encounters someone, they just, like, die. And so there's not a longevity to it from the 60s. And so, like, this Power Cosmic where it's like, yeah, I can show up and I can do almost anything, but there's one more guy who's strong. So to make it, you know, a story that is interesting and dynamic, I mean, it's a Superman problem all over again, just in a different universe and on a more cosmic scale.
Yeah, I do like, you know, you mentioned the one thing where, why can I breathe? It's a Power Cosmic. Why can I understand? It does very harken back to that 60s style where a lot of the details weren't necessarily explained, and that was okay. I mean, obviously it was a different audience back then, but it opens the door for like more interesting exploration into things where everything doesn't necessarily make sense, and we'll especially get that in Volume 2, where which we'll get to, which gets into some even like stranger characters and how, like, why would they be aliens? Anyways, but I do really love the sense of humor that's in this. Like, Dan Slott does have a very unique sense of humor. Like, he obviously is real well known for his work in Spider-Man. Of course, like, that's a book that has a lot of humor in it. And he did She-Hulk. And this, you know, you see that too. I mean, there's even like a reference to the Three Stooges, which, you know, I was not expecting to see in a Silver Surfer book. But I think just that tone of it does feel like a slight modernization of like a Stan Lee type of book, minus just endless exposition that he would typically provide.
Oh man, that's the worst thing about those old books, is that they would be nothing but words, and they like didn't tell you anything.
Yeah, I was recently rereading, you know, the Fantastic Four, which Dan Slott ironically will be, or serendipitously will be taking over in a few months, and going back and reading the first few volumes of it, and it's interesting. It's different. It's a very different style, but it definitely, seeing that, reading that, and then coming back and reading this first volume, you're like, okay, I can see what he was kind of going for. He kind of did an amalgamation of like all these different types of styles and created its own unique thing. It's just like the perfect melding of approach, of art, and it just, I don't know, it's something that just ended up being rather special and unlike really any Silver Surfer book. Like, I know huge Silver Surfer fans, and I'm like, I don't know if they would like this, because it's such a unique type of take on the character that is unlike, you know, the Jim Starlin type of stories. It's much more, you know, it's not as action packed. It's more dramatic in a way that the stories themselves, even though they're taking place in galactic level places and galaxies far away, they ended up being rather small. Even when we get to one of the final stories before the with the nightmare guy, and like it's just them in Cape Cod, and I don't know. I like how they utilized Dawn and her world to humanize the character of Silver Surfer. It makes sense and it worked effectively.
Yeah, like the play is great.
Since I don't know how much background you have with the character of Silver Surfer, or or Marvel in general, and this does have like a lot of references to different things, and from some of them Eternity and all these other worldly characters. Was it ever hard to kind of get your bearings of everything, considering like all the different there was not exact references or callbacks to stories, but it certainly, I think, has some assumption that how the Marvel universe functions.
Yeah, I've got a pretty great understanding of the Marvel universe. I like to think I'm the type of guy who, when I get into it, I get a little too into it. So when I got into comic books, even though I definitely focus DC a lot more than Marvel, I would still buy plenty of Marvel, and what I didn't read in comic book, I would probably read on the internet, because there's plenty of great resources to figure out, like hey, I need to know who Eternity are, and I know you need to, or is, and I know you need to know how the universe is both a thing and a person, and I need to know about the eternal judges, maybe. Like there's all kinds of, like, especially when you go into the heavy cosmic stuff, like you're gonna get from a Silver Surfer or the Eternals.
Yep, the Eternals.
Yeah, like all of those, you're gonna have a lot of weird cosmic stuff. So like I'm pretty well versed. I can't say that I've read a Nightmare story before, but like he looks familiar. And it's like, I feel like they did a good enough job getting you introduced to the things.
Yeah. I know. I'm assuming like like who the Defenders are and things, and like kind of like we talked about, like the origins of Silver Surfer, which are touched upon here, but they're not. I don't think you necessarily have to know everything about them, but I think it helps certainly a little bit.
Like, I don't know everything about the original Galactus story, right? I didn't know that Silver Surfer got sequestered to Earth. Like, I knew that he turned, I knew that he blew up the machine or whatever that the Galactus was building to eat the planet, but I didn't know that he got stuck there. Like, and I know some of the Defender. Like, I had, enough to get by, and I feel like what I didn't have, they did a good enough job filling in.
One thing we see with this first volume too is like, because it's more isolated in Earth, we get a lot of other characters kind of show up, the Guardians of the Galaxy, and which is when I'm like, I don't know, because it's like the Agent Venom, which I know is like something people might be confused by. It's like, why is that Venom and why does he look like it's weird, but and then obviously Doctor Strange and the Hulk, like we mentioned. Did you feel like their presence at all felt like unnecessary or like forced in, or did it fit within the story for you?
As weird as it sounds, like, the Guardians of the Galaxy are the ones I would expect more, because they're the ones that are out there in space. But that felt really, like, a little weird, because it was just like, they just did like a 3-page pit stop. But like Doctor Strange and the Hulk, who are teammates, of the Silver Surfer, like, they felt normal, because that felt more like a Doctor Strange story than a Silver Surfer story anyway.
Yeah.
So, like, the ones that were more, like, the ones I expected to be there less ended up feeling and fitting more properly.
Yeah, I felt like for the Guardians of the Galaxy, they were just there to be on the cover, because it's like, I think this was out when the movie was really hot, or around that time, so it's like, let's throw them on the cover so that we can sell some bucks, and they didn't really do much. I don't remember if they ever play another role within this. I get kind of lost when it comes to like the different eras of Marvel, because this was all new, all different Marvel now, and then there was like all different, and there was like all new, all different, and it was, I don't know. It's hard to keep track of all the different relaunches when it comes to Marvel, but I did like the interaction between Doctor Strange and Hulk, especially when they first appear, and there's that great scene of like the guy driving by in the truck and then backing up, and then Hulk pretending that he's Banner the entire time. But I thought that flowed a little bit more, made a little bit more sense, and how it was built, where the Guardians of the Galaxy kind of just came out a little bit of left field, and I'm not really sure I understood what exactly they were doing. I thought that was going to lead to something, but it didn't really lead to anything as of right now, at least by the end of this first volume.
Yeah, and I enjoy that he draws the Hulk in the classic style, just fitting even more into that art niche.
You mentioned like the last story. Did you read this and you read the physical form, right? Like not the digital copy.
Yeah.
Okay.
I picked these up and
I was curious because like I have the digital volume and like the last story is done in what they call like infinite comics, which I'm still not even sure what that's supposed to mean, but it's like one panel per page. It was weird reading it. How was it presented in the actual like physical form? Was it just a normal comic?
Yeah, it just looks like I couldn't tell that there was anything different about it. Like if they hadn't posted the name of the thing, I would have just assumed it was, issue number 6.
Okay. I was curious because it like when reading it digitally, it operates a little bit different. Where like you'll have the panels, and then it's meant for I think the panel reader. It's like designed for that, and the way it presents itself. So it was a little odd to get because I would be missing panels because I think I read this already, but actually the words were changing, just the panels weren't, and I was like, that's odd. That was an odd choice.
Oh.
Like, I'm like, how do they do that in the physical form? But I guess they just handle it normally. You mentioned like that's where the story really started to kind of kick in for you. Was that because of the the fact that you have that one where it's like full of crazy creatures and a little bit more out there? Was that why that piece worked a little bit more for you than some of the other stories?
So the characters know each other and they're interacting like that rather than like trying to rub against each other in weird ways because like he's an alien and she's not. I'm a sucker for anthropomorphic characters, and so when you've got like these ferret people and a dolphin person and a turtle person, like it's very charming. And then you've got these sharks where like shark people wielding like old timey flintlock pistols, but they're actually laser guns. I love that like absurdity, silly funness to it. But then like it's also got like a moral quandary sort of situation, a lot like you would see in like a Star Trek, which I love Star Trek too. And it's like, can the Silver Surfer, who's got this past, just enjoy life, and he has to figure that out while deciding whether he's hiding his past, deciding how long to hide his past from this character, because everywhere they go, everyone's like, oh no, it's the Herald, and she's like, oh, is your name Harold? Like,
yeah.
And so, like, I feel like this finally, like, it's finally hit its stride by this last story.
Yeah. Like you said, it was a lot of setup to like, okay, this is what it's going to be. It's like the pilot before the second, the pilot that's good, but it just really gives you the idea, setting the stage. And then that last issue is like, okay, now we're off and running. But I do like a lot of the little like fish out of water, like how she thinks she calls the board to me, like you think she thinks that's its name, and these little things that she certainly, I think, a commentary on just the absurdity of comics, but I think it works.
Well, it's great because she's not reading it, so she doesn't
Yeah.
know where those spaces are. Like, like it's a level of self-awareness that I wouldn't have expected that I love. And like when Silver Surfer sees her twin and thinks she's a Skrull, like I love how comic books it is and how aware it is that it's comic books.
Yeah, it's like approaching breaking the fourth wall, but never quite getting there. It's like right there on the edge, and but it never like it's actually like then pointing at the camera and saying hi, but it gets pretty close.
It's a little more subtle than your Deadpools.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, was there anything else about this first volume that you wanted to discuss, or anything other topic regarding it at all?
Oh, I do want to point out, like, and I hate to be another person who does this same, I don't know, complaint. I listened to some of your previous episodes, and someone else brought this up. This one's a particularly difficult one if you're holding it to know what panel comes next, because there'll be 2-page spreads that'll just be like, 3 panels. There'd be 9 panels, right? And like they look very similar, and it's not obvious whether you're supposed to read all the way across the double page spread or just 1 page at a time. And I encountered problems with that in the first volume maybe 3 times. And like, I don't know, I feel like a seasoned comic book guy, and like, when I get tricked by that or I have that flub, like, it bothers me probably more than it should.
Was that like specifically, I'm thinking of like the story with Doctor Strange and Hulk, where you have the 2 double page spreads, or where there are like 4-6 panels up, there's 3 rows really, And the last row is the interaction between Hulk and Doctor Strange, and the two above are all the panels that with Dawn and Silver Surfer through their interaction. Was that the panels that you had trouble with? I wasn't sure if that was the one, because those were two specific double page spreads where you kind of had multitude of stories going on the same page.
You know, I think that actually that those might have been the problem, but I know it happened in the second book too. So like, okay. I know that that's not the only thing, but like, yeah, I mean, it wasn't enough to turn me off in any way, but like, it's something I encountered that I figured I should bring up so that it's not just up 30 minutes of us going, hey, this is a really good book and I enjoyed it. Like,
yeah.
Not necessarily perfect.
No. And like I said, I think there's a lot of people who would read this and not like it, because it goes for a certain style and approach that it's not universal. And I'm surprised that, I like it when Marvel does give freedom like this to some of their creators. Like I've listened to some interviews of Dan Slott and talking about the series and where it kind of came from, and it was they do these writer summits and kind of just came up through conversation with other writers and just pitching. I think he was pitching something else or pitching it for someone else, and then he ended up taking over and writing it, and then someone mentioned Mike Allred, and it just all kind of went together really well. But I could see for a lot of people would read this and be like, it's kind of weird. She's carrying an evil monkey at one point. Like, I don't understand what's happening. And like I said, there's not like a lot of action. Like, I love Mike Allred as an artist, but I would say like he's best served for a story like this. If you're having like a action-packed fighting sequence, his art doesn't flow that well. And when it comes to that, it's a little bit more staticky for the most part. There's a lot of power to it, but it's not like, I think that might be sometimes too why some of those panels that you had or coherency with them can be off, because he does fill the page with a lot of things, but with that it can get kind of disorienting at times.
Like I don't know, that's one of the things I actually love about comic books is like the way different artists can approach things differently.
Yeah. Like
I love Daniel Acuna. I don't know if he's doing anything anymore because like I haven't read one of his books in like 12 years, but like the way he would do the Green Lantern, like where it looked almost like a washed out, like I want to say washed out painting kind of, but like not like Alex Ross's paintings.
Yeah, I think it's all about consistency and kind of making sure the right style flows with the right story. Like I don't think you could do this same art with like a Todd McFarlane, just throwing a name out there. Like I don't think it would work as well. Maybe I'm wrong, but with a Mike Allred, I don't know. It's just like the perfect mixture of. It's like almost like if Wes Anderson did a superhero story, that type of aesthetic. Maybe I'm wrong, and people are getting angry at that type of idea. But it just reminds me, just the retro feel of it, just how it's so uniform at times. But like I tend to prefer like styles like Mike Allred, like more cartoony styles like the Darwin Cooks, the Chris Samnees, more than like the realistic take. But for the right story, it could work. But yeah, anything else before we bring this episode to a close?
No, I think I've said my piece.
Alrighty, well, if more people wanted to get in touch with you, follow what you do, what would be the best way to do that?
I'm like on Twitter at Fridley Sent. Like if you want to talk about comic books or Star Wars, I would love to discuss anything with any of your listeners.
Nice.
And if you want to get in contact with this show, you can do so by hitting me up on Twitter at Movie Revolt. The show is also on Facebook and Instagram. Just search Comic Concierge. Also, if you want to leave an episode comment, go ahead and go to geekcastradio.com or nerdly.co.uk. Also, if you want to be cool, you can go to iTunes, leave us a 4-star or 5-star review. It'd be great. Really, we're brand new here, so the more reviews we can get, the better. The more people will learn about our podcast. But that's it for this week. Remember that comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Until next time, thanks for listening.
On my supersonic rocket ship, nobody has to be helped, nobody needs to be out of sight. Oh, out of sight, man. Nobody's gonna travel second class at the